Morning, Ben. Good to see you again.
Hello, how are you, Matt?
I'm good. You've sent me some interesting slides again, so let's crack on.
Yes, good. So the contents this week are mainly to do with the weather. What to do. The weather through the country has been very variable. In our part of the world, it's been very dry for a long time. I gather other parts of the country might have had a bit more rain, but the main thing is lots of dry, poor dry weather and poor grass growths. So the two questions are what to do about this poor grass growth and what happens when it rains, if it ever does. But firstly, just this comes up every year. This picture is of a sheep with mastitis, and the next picture shows what the ewes are telling you, which is that they've had enough and that the milk flows are starting to drop, and that it's probably a good idea to wean them about now if you haven't already. Mastitis is generally caused by infection getting up into the udder when it shouldn't be there, and one of the main infections that happens with is in the bacteria that live in the back of the lamb's throats, and that is more likely to happen if the milk flow is slow. There's more trauma when the lambs are sucking and they suck the teats further into the back of the throat. That Mannheimia hemolytica bacteria goes up into the bag and you end up with the bag looking like this. But secondary considerations for mastitis will be MV, and if you are weaning ewes, it's probably a good idea to bleed some thin ones at that moment, because MV can contribute to mastitis, and so can things like ORF. The more I see about niggling problems of lamb growth and stuff like that, I'm finding more and more that MV is at the bottom of it. So I think you need to know sooner rather than later, have you got MV or haven't you?
That restriction of milk production and milk flow really impacts your lamb growth, and makes it more likely that these ewes are going to get a clinical mastitis. And then even if your ewe has got MV, if you can cull her deliberately, she's worth something. If she dies of mastitis, then she's a cost.
It's a net cost, absolutely. And here is another reason why you might want to wean. Grass growth, as I say, are poor around here. And generally speaking, the sort of assumption is if lambs aren't growing, that the main reason for that might be worms in a normal season. As the season progresses, this year that might not be quite true, because one of the reasons for poor lamb growth might be just lack of nutrition with poor grass growths. Now, going forward, certainly with us and other parts of the country that's been dry, there probably is going to be a shortage of forage as we go into the winter, and you want to have as few mouths to feed through the winter as you possibly can if forage is going to be tight. So it occurs to me that weaning some of the worst lambs, the worst 20%, weaning them and housing them, you will win twice, because you'll get them away sooner than you otherwise would, and those little worm machines, when the worms do start to come, won't be putting the worms onto the pasture for next year.
If you take those slower growing, the poorer end at weaning, and take them off the mums early and feed them, you get a better result than if you try and rear them on grass. That's been proven. And yes, there's a bit of cost up front, but more of them survive and more of them make it to slaughter weight. It's definitely worth doing.
And make sure they're wormed at housing probably with a worm to which there isn't much resistance. So that would be a group 4 or a group 5, and then that won't be constraining their growth rates, and you won't be feeding them or feeding the worms as well as the lambs.
I agree with you. If you're spending money on feed, don't waste it on worms.
And on the subject of worms, I think it's probably fair to say that generally, because of dry conditions, they haven't really been conducive to a lot of worm hatching. The worms are probably mostly waiting rather than hatching. However, this next slide shows a couple of pictures where a minority of lambs have still been picking up worms. This makes me think that mob worm egg counts are okay, but it might just be worth having a real close look at your lambs and trying, if you can, and if you've got a good dog, capture the lambs that are actually scouring, the poorer end ones, and target those with your worm egg counts and see if they need doing, because I just suspect that the normal, the low worm burdens for the majority of them at the moment might just mask the odd one that really is bad.
The aim is to worm the ones that need worming and leave the ones that don't. So in an odd year like this, And again, we have to say that some areas of the country has not been dry.
Mm.
Grass growth is good, but where you've had dry, poor grass growth, less likely to have worm hatch. If you have got a few lambs in the group that are looking poor, definitely target them.
Even more important to target those.
Yeah.
What is going to happen when it does rain, and when we do get some serious rain, and when the grass does grow, which we have had some recently, and this is probably happening at the moment. Well, mainly in lambs, what happens when it goes from a bowling green here to grass growth? Well, three things happen for lambs. Well, two things happen for lambs, sorry. It's going to trigger pulpy kidney, so it's important that these lambs have had 2 vaccines, and you've had time by now to have got two vaccines into them. This photo on the right here is red gut, which is an intestinal torsion caused by a sudden increase in carbohydrates in the diet. Not much you can do about that, but be prepared for it. And if there are some margins that are stalky, then hopefully the lambs will eat those. That's a risk of pulpy kidneys. There is some suggestion that covexin and bravoxin may mitigate the losses for intestinal torsions. And then the other thing to look out for is grass staggers in suckler cows, especially later calving ones that will be more like towards the peak of their lactation. Later on, after a couple of weeks after rain, that will stimulate all the worms to hatch, and the gut worms in lambs and also lungworms in cattle.
And once you've had that rain and flush of grass starting, it's time to move your lambs onto a lower risk ground if you can. In advance of them getting that hit with a high worm challenge.
Yes. Plan ahead to have as few mouths to feed over the winter, right? And who wants to look at scroty lambs in February anyway?
Yeah. Don't waste your grass on them. Save it for the ewes that might need to put a bit of condition back on.
Absolutely.
Very good.
Good.
As ever, thank you very much, Ben.
Thanks, Matt. See you next time.
Cheers.